So here we have a video of someone who claims that they're going to fix woke culture. So let's see how he goes about it.
Friends, and welcome to History Legends. Today we'll be reacting to this video called How France's Colonial Past Explains Its Racism Today.
So for those of you that don't know, France colonized part of Africa, and with that came extreme racism, one that Africa had not seen for a while. Now, of course, there is other European countries that had their own version of extreme racism, but this racism has been reported still, I mean, in things like football and stuff like that. And France has been trying to go the other way around, which is why people try to explain the racism. Now, it's hard, of course, to deal with a country that speaks a completely different language, but the facts are the facts, and France has got a racist past.
No spoilers, it looks promising. Essentially, we're talking about woke activists that live in France, very important fact, that rewrite history because they're broke and they want your cash.
So it's just a bunch of broke people who want money by explaining why France is racist. I think there's better ways of making money, like, pandering to the French people and telling them why they're not racist and telling them how their history is the greatest. I mean, criticizing your own history is not necessarily the best path.
It's why there are growing calls for France to recognize and apologize for its violent colonization of millions of people in Africa and Asia.
Spain is still waiting for an apology for the 800-year-long Muslim occupation of their land.
So, of course, this is that whataboutism that you usually see, where it's like, oh, what about Al-Andalus? What about their colonization? And of course, the question would be, if they apologize, are you going to apologize? And the answer is probably going to be no, because they don't think they did anything wrong, except they think everybody else who colonized Europe did something wrong. I mean, you will hear some of these guys literally talk about the Moors. By the way, the only time these guys will mention that the Moors are black is when they try to talk about how black people colonized Europe first.
As a matter of fact, Vienna could also demand apologies from Turkey for the Ottoman siege of Vienna not once, but twice. But do you see the Austrians ask for an apology? No.
So one of the things that he's not taking into consideration is ultimate defeat. So the Ottomans got destroyed, and that's why they don't really demand an apology, because they got their land back and kicked everybody out. The Muslims and the Moors and everybody else got kicked out of Al-Andalus, and those are the people who consider themselves native. They got their land back, and so it's pretty different to demand an apology in that way, whereas in other ways these people are still running some of those places. And so also it's recent, it's not something from like long time ago. It's not like we're saying that, the ancient Egyptians should apologize to the Kushites or something. We're talking about something that's very recent.
Oh, because the Turks would look at them and say, Wallahi Kardesh, Turkey Army #1. We can come anytime. If we come, Hali bye bye Austrian Army.
Let's take a look at France.
Yeah, sounds great, except that the Ottomans were defeated. I mean, look at Ottoman territory today and compare it to what they had in the past.
Historic colonial crimes to understand the conversations on race happening today, and why the French elite say no when it comes to acknowledging its racist imperialist past.
In their ideology, colonialism is by default a crime. So when woke activists mention colonial crimes, they lose their minds.
So keep in mind of the type of person you're talking about here. This person thinks that colonialism is not a crime. In which situation do you really think in the modern world would we encourage colonialism? No one encourages colonialism unless, of course, the power has already been done and there's really nothing you can do about it at this point. But no one encourages new countries. Like the places that China is trying to colonize on its borders, America opposes that. Europe opposes that. Everybody opposes that. So why do you think that it's okay to colonialize people? And starting with that premise, like, oh, they're angry because they think colonialism is wrong. Don't you? The only other option at this point is to say it's okay, let's just keep doing it. Europe, by the way, seemed very against colonialism when Germany decided to colonize some of their countries. Oh, and one more thing. These guys, they have to be against colonialism because they're against migrants moving into their countries. That's not even colonialism, and they're against it. They're like, oh, which they basically support the great replacement theory, which I'm going to make a video on that. Even they've convinced North Africa to embrace this theory and basically torture Africans.
Same thing goes for racist imperialism. However, the golden rule is that it's only racist imperialism when a white country does it.
Okay, so give us some examples of racist imperialism the other way. Which empire dominated Europe on the grounds of racism?
Otherwise, it's chill. It's just part of a country's right to expand beyond its borders, and it's just part of history.
Okay, again, complete misunderstanding. He put Shaka Zulu there as an example of racist imperialism. First of all, Shaka Zulu couldn't have been racist. He was black, and all the people he was conquering were black. So I don't know where the racism comes in. Also, you think that the people he was colonizing were never upset? They literally had words that meant like the tragedy or the killing or the bloodshed for the times when the Zulu kingdom would come and conquer their lands. Colonialism, even done by Africans, is not seen as like a great thing. You just see it that way because you never really hear about it.
Of course, because white people are evil. For example, Malians take great pride in the Mali Empire.
Well, so I don't know if they take great pride in it, but I do understand that they acknowledge that it existed and it contributed a lot to the civilizations. Nobody is saying that empire does not bring good things. The thing that people are saying is that there is a difference between an empire that fuses states and an empire that crushes the native population so that it can feed a few rich men. That is where the racism part would come in. A racist empire, which of course, no one's saying Europe is the only one that was racist towards other people, but how many were racist towards Europe when they colonized them?
That grew through military conquest and subjugated all neighboring kingdoms, without even mentioning Mansa Musa and his thousands of slaves. And it's
Well, all empires grow through violence and they also grow through all of that because, of course, they're an empire. But there's a difference between forming an empire where people are going to live versus forming a drainage system where you take away from the continent and leave it dry. So let's take an example, right? What is the difference between what happened in Mali and what happened to the Native Americans? Let's try another one. What is the difference between what happened in Asia, right? Asians conquering Asians versus what happened to the Native Americans? Or what happened to the Native Australians? Or what happened to pick a place where Europe came and devastated the entire population? There is a huge difference in these two.
not until the arrival of the French troops in Mali that slavery and human sacrifices were abolished.
So, by the way, you will notice a high level of looking down at all of these things. So, let's say that the Mali Empire was bad, right? Because of what they did, possible human sacrifice, possible all of this other stuff, slavery. Then you should then agree that the colonialism of Europe is bad because they had a lot of those things too.
Let's start at the 17th century when the French colonized the Americas. North American colonies became known as New France.
If you're going to denounce French imperialism, at least do it with facts. Who is the intern? You didn't pay to make this map. Not only do I have to react to this video, I have to fix this video. So the French also settled in Guyana. They also had this region, Acadia, for a long time, as well as part of Newfoundland. And if I'm very picky, the French also controlled the island of Trinidad. Notice how almost all the Caribbean islands were French at some point in time. There were as many French settlers in the Caribbean, roughly 54,000 people from France, as in all of North America from New Orleans to Acadia. And from a military perspective, it just makes sense because islands are much easier to defend than the huge swath of land of North America filled with hostile natives and English settlers.
So I want you to notice the way that he framed that part. Hostile natives. Hostile to what? You mean them being hostile to take over? Were the French not hostile? The way that they keep talking about these people, it's obvious that they're on one side and they go, oh yeah, the French people who were coming there to expand, and then the hostile natives that were just there ready with their hostility and human sacrifice. There is something that is odd in the way they talk about these people.
French colonized parts of the Caribbean. This included Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti. It grew to be the richest sugar colony because of the labor of enslaved Africans.
No!
Very well. Where do I begin?
Saint-Domingue did not simply become rich because of slave labor. If slave labor alone was synonymous of wealth, why were African kingdoms at the time so poor? After all, they're the ones that gathered all these millions of slaves that they captured from enemy tribes.
So I could sit here and read you 100 texts written by Europeans that will tell you that Africa was not poor at the time of slavery. In fact, it got richer because they were selling more slaves than ever before. And of course, the part of Africa that was selling the most amount of slaves was North Africa, because they had been engaging in high scale level of slavery for a long time. So as we read here, and by the way, they're talking about Barbary here, and then they comment on the Negrolands, and he says, Beledelgerid borders on the kingdom of Fez, produces great quantity of antimony and sundry other have veins of sulfur, but above all the rich mines of gold and silver, those especially in Negrolands, Guinea, Ethiopia, deserve admiration. This is from Alfred Dappert. And again, he is comparing 4 parts of Africa: North Africa with Fez, Guinea, Ethiopia, and the Negrolands in general. So I understand that it's woke to go and look at actual historical sources and report back what they said they saw at the time. And I know you mentioned Mansa Musa having slaves. Do you not know that Mansa Musa's kingdom was rich as hell? What about that? Like, does that just roll off your back? In your head, they're just poor. Everyone who was in Africa was just poor. Not to mention the Kingdom of Congo was rich as hell. Again, we can find easily texts that say this. Great Zimbabwe was really at its height at that time of slavery, even though they weren't being enslaved at all. The Swahili coast, which was being enslaved by the Middle Easterners, well, some Middle Easterners were taking slaves from that area. They were at their height at the same time. In fact, they actually became higher during the time of Oman, because they became richer and richer and could buy Western stuff easily during the era of transformation. So this idea that, like, oh, it couldn't have been slavery because everybody else had slaves and they were poor. No, you are absolutely incorrect. They would have given, let's just appeal to logic real quick. They would have given up slavery if it wasn't making them money. I don't know where this concept comes from, that there's people who are willing to take up the moral downsides of slavery and not profit from it.
Which meant that they had an almost infinite pool of slave labor. They could have kept them all and just become super rich.
For a guy who's correcting history, he knows almost nothing about history, to be honest. What do you mean he could have kept them all and became rich? You do realize a lot of the people who were sent overseas as slaves didn't start as slaves. They were being captured. Normal people were being captured and sent. In Africa, they wouldn't have been slaves. So keeping them there would have just kept them as free men. And yes, as free men, they were contributing to the society and made the societies rich. Again, if you want, we could do this. We could just sit there and go through each and every European source. You cannot find a European source that talks about those empires at that time that will describe them as poor.
If slave labor was so profitable, why did they resort to selling millions of their African brothers to the Arabs and then to the Europeans?
This guy is actually slow because they weren't their brothers. There were people captured in war. There are runts, criminals, all kinds of people that were taken. Some people who probably would have been, as you mentioned, human sacrificed. And they're like, just sell them to the Europeans. Do you not understand how this thing works? And also, if it was profitable, it was profitable. What are you talking about? Let me ask a question, because I'm not like, Bill Gates or something. So we maybe need a businessman over here. Let me ask you this question. If you pay zero for the people who work for you, you pay zero, except you give them food and stuff, and they work for you for free every day, and you can basically make them do whatever. Do you think that you're not going to make a profit? Maybe I just don't understand business at all. Do you think that if you have a bunch of people who you have captured and they work for you for free, do you think that it's impossible to make a profit from those people?
Truth is, Saint-Domingue was a capitalist wet dream. This colony that was not even an island but a small part of an island became the biggest producer of sugar in the world. But what made it rich is actually coffee. Saint-Domingue produced half the coffee on the entire world market.
Right. You mean the industry that is okay, let's try this another way. And who do you think was very involved in that coffee market? I mean, I know the sugar one is still an important one, but for some reason you don't want to expand on that. Who do you think was doing the let's say it, the dog work when it came to that coffee market?
This tiny bit of land the size of New Jersey was exporting more than the newly independent United States.
Because, like you said, they had an unlimited amount of free labor, which they didn't have to pay. They can produce more of them. They can have their needs met. And then, by the way, a capitalist wet dream is including slavery. Like if you just have capitalism with no other blockages, you will get to slavery.
According to the 1790 census, there were 700,000 slaves in the US out of a total of nearly 4 million inhabitants. At the same time, in Saint-Domingue, the census reported 400,000 slaves out of 500,000 inhabitants.
Wait, does this guy not realize what he just said? So you're saying that basically 80% of the population was slaves, and you don't think slaves are the reason why that population grew to what it was? You're saying 400, this is based on your information, you're saying 400,000 people were slaves and they basically worked in those fields, and then you're saying only 100,000 of them were free men. And you can't see why people would say slavery is what made the money. You think that the slaves were not the one. You think it was the 100,000 that's responsible for the profitability, huh? They just were like, let's just invite 400,000 people who are not going to help us profit. They're just going to, we just like holding people in chains. You just think that they were just pure sadists with no other motive, just pure sadism.
With the less slave labor, Saint-Domingue managed to outperform the United States.
Okay, so I don't know if this guy knows how numbers work, but you do understand why it would be more advantageous to have a concentration in a small land filled with slaves versus a widely dispersed area where there's slave here, slave here, slave here, slave here, slave here, and so they are not as unified as one of these, which would have a proper market or whatever. I mean, to say this, let's just everybody listen to me. I'm getting rid of the moral side of it. I'm just going to say it as it is. Do you think that if you were a slave owner, that you would not? First of all, 700,000 versus 400,000. We're not talking about a giant leap from one another here. We're talking about more than half, really. And then we're talking about almost the entire population is slaves. The other one basically has to still deal with normal people. You said there's 4 million people. You still have to deal with normal people. There's some things you can see there that are not going to allow them to just be pure workers. It's the same as you saying that like some gang members that sell illegal substances are outselling companies with like 1,000 employees. It's like, yeah, because they have a concentration of what they're doing and they're working without moral or morals.
The main reason behind the economical success of the colony is that France massively invested to build infrastructure, mainly through private investors that paid for highly technological machinery that was brought and built on the island. They were
I get it. So it was just technology, was it? It wasn't the like 400,000 slaves they have in a 500,000, by the way, these are his numbers, population. By the way, who ran those machines? Let me ask you that question. Who's the person who ran those machines?
roughly 7,000 factories and mills of all kinds for the production and transformation of the sugarcane, coffee, and other products.
Again, who carried the coffee there, who took the coffee out, who bagged it, who is this guy actually confused on how things work? Like you do understand that there was no AI back then. The machines weren't running themselves.
On average, there was one factory every 2.5 football fields. And this overexploitation of the land was multiplied by a massive workforce. In the end, there were thousands of ships coming in and out of the ports of Saint-Domingue. And that's how you get the richest colony of the Americas.
Wait, did this guy say... Okay, so let's do the math again. So he said 100,000 freemen, 400,000 slaves, and then he said workforce. There were thousands of people in the workforce. There were... Okay, so where was this workforce coming from? Who's this workforce? And if it is a paid workforce, why would they get so many slaves and then pay people to work? Do they just want them to be there, like join them, just be like, hey guys, watch as we do the work?
The French also established trading settlements across the coast of India. In the middle of the 18th century, France and Britain got into colonial conflicts. Much of France's first empire was destroyed.
Add some freaking dates for the audience. First collapse 1763 as a result of the 7 Years' War. How, you ask me? Without a proper navy, you can't really secure your colonies, especially when your nemesis is the Royal Navy. And as a result, the French lost all of its colonies in North America and India, apart from little trading posts. France essentially sacrificed these huge colonies just to keep some of the Caribbean islands.
So all that is just a weird way of saying that the French overexpanded and then they got defeated because they couldn't sustain their kingdoms. And yeah, basically that's what happened. Now, the way, again, listen to the way he's talking about it. They sacrificed some, no, they lost them. They didn't sacrifice anything. They lost them. And I don't know why you're taking such pleasure in them having an empire, but yet you wanted to look down on other empires in other places. This whole thing is just confusing. By the way, I don't know how this gets to the point where France is not, or the French were not racist.
Now, as you saw with Saint-Domingue, these remaining colonies were still extremely profitable, which made the British extremely jealous.
Yes, they were extremely profitable because of the slave trade, and it made them jealous because they were still engaged in slavery as well.
And then round two. So the second collapse happened in the years of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. The upheaval of the revolution knocked down the flourishing French Royal Navy, and the massive repression campaign forced 90% of the captains to flee abroad. The British took advantage of Napoleon's campaigns all over Europe to take over all the remaining French colonies, more often than not with the help of French royalist plantation owners that also despised the Republic and its ideals of freedom.
But it didn't
So I'm starting to see what's happening here. This guy wants to tell the history of the French Empire, but he can't just do that. He has to like put it under this umbrella of anti-woke so that people can press and watch, because there's a lot of racists out there. And of course, anti-woke is trying to come after black people in this case. But, you know, they've got their hundreds of targets out there. I don't know why they obsess over this. Hopefully they leave this word back in 2025.
take long for French empire building to continue. France invaded Algeria in 1830.
Oh no! Come on! They make it seem as if the French were on some sort of colonial roid rage.
Maybe it's a language barrier, but does he think that they colonized in like a friendly way? They were in a colonial road rage. You just mentioned that they colonized India, the Americas, parts of Africa. Oh my god.
Need to colonize. They don't even explain why in 1830 specifically. France even picked Algeria out of all the other places like Morocco, Tunisia, Libya.
Okay, so they don't explain it. Let's see. What reasons could there be to colonize the area? One, familiarity. Two, money. Three, easier to colonize. Four, closer to their lands. What else could there be? Like, it's not exactly like rocket science. By the way, money is a big part of it. Money, colonization, colonization, money.
Long story short, during the years of the French Revolution, the Bay of Algiers supplied France with much needed grain. The government of the French Republic was broke and never really repaid him. Understandably, the Algerians were pissed.
So that makes it fine then. What? I don't understand the point of this. Like, okay, they ran out of money. What's that? What does that have to do with Algeria? Why is it okay to colonize Algeria?
Napoleon came to power, they kept harassing him to pay back. And in return, he was like, you want to pay back? You'll get a payback. He prepared a very detailed amphibious landing on Algiers to solve his debt with cannonballs and bayonets.
Okay, so in order to pay his debts, he went and colonized someone else's land. And I mean, I'm glad you did like a very evil voice of like a mafia guy, because that's basically what he did. Like, what do you like? All this guy is doing is explaining the video and why it makes sense that the French were really quite evil back then.
In the end, he never launched the expedition. So now Napoleon was gone, the new French king comes in and pays Algiers half of the sum. But overall the dispute continued because the payment was done 20 years late and half the cash was still missing. Then comes the opportunist King Charles X. He wanted to improve his approval rating among the French population. They were still alpha widowed because they compared every new king to Napoleon. So here's the situation in the late 1820s. Algiers was a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire.
Another European-born empire that came with racist ideologies.
France supported the Greeks and were at war against the Ottoman Empire. So to further weaken their enemy, King Charles X essentially pulled out Napoleon's plan from the drawers. And then they came out with some bogus excuse, like the ships were already sailing towards Algiers and they're like, okay, let's find a good reason to attack them. In spring 1830, the French...
Listen, you can't criticize the other video saying that they didn't give a reason and then say the reason why they did it was because the ships were already going in that direction. You got to come up with a much better reason than that.
French army disembarked 38,000 men, and 2 weeks later they captured Algiers. Napoleon's plan was indeed perfect. The question was, what now? Local chieftains rebelled, so the French army went to storm one rebel city after another, with a real objective of what they were planning to achieve.
Speaking of achieving, all you've achieved is to convince me that these guys, instead of paying their debts, which, add that to the reparations, instead of paying their debts, they decided to go and kill the people they owed money to.
And then colonized much of North Africa, West Africa, Equatorial Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, and islands in the Pacific.
Oh my god, I can't believe it. They actually used a modern map. Who is the intern that made the maps? All these countries did not exist back in the days.
That's your criticism, that they used a modern map and then layered over it the places that would have been colonized. I don't get that criticism. What I do understand though is that you don't want to address the main thing, which is France basically went on a rampage, dominating states in Africa. So as you mentioned earlier, you said, "Oh, they must colonize." There you have it. They're just let's colonize.
Anyway, I find it very ironic that they portray the French as some overpowered military force that just came and just conquered Africa like that, while ignoring all the rebellions and resistance to colonial authorities by African tribes and kingdoms.
I actually have no idea. He could be saying two things, but I don't understand what he's talking about. Either he's saying that they should have also showed that there were other people in Africa trying to colonize and the Africans resisted them too, or he's saying that they should have showed that Africans were resisting the French. I don't know why any of these matter, because there's a much greater force coming in and dominating everybody, and so it becomes the common enemy. And that's where this thing that he was talking about, brotherhood in the beginning, why are they selling their own brothers? That's where they start having this mentality of brothers. And I can show you early texts about how Africans started seeing each other as similar, starting with a king from West Africa that was sent to Madagascar. And because they saw the way he was dressed and the fact that he was black, they looked at him as a part of them. And he could have started a rebellion in Madagascar. Actually, he started a little bit, but then they moved him to Mauritius, I think, or Mauritania, Mauritius, because they realized,
But who cares about the truth? It simply slows us down from promoting our political agenda. Okay.
What political agenda? They're telling you that France colonized Africa. By the way, show me a European documentary. Show me a European documentary that talks about how Europe colonized Africa, and the way they do it is by showing minor African kingdoms and their little squabbles and how rich they were and why they wanted to live. Show me that documentary. I bet you it don't exist. You're acting like everybody out here is taking this deep dive thing that you're talking about. No, they don't.
Okay. Do you want to trigger woke historians? Arwa, come here. They will never admit that in most cases the French conquered Africa with locally recruited troops.
Who the hell would not admit that? That, yeah, of course, they would go and intimidate, use, buy out people in local areas. In fact, go watch any documentary about Africa by Africans, and they will talk about the sellouts. They will talk about the easy people to pay out, the splits, using religion as a way to divide, using their own country as a way to divide, using regional terms, religion. In the case of India, they use religion to try and divide further and further. The fight that we still have today in India was birthed by the British. It was a very evil tactic they did of divide and conquer. No one is denying that they did that.
See, when the French captured Algiers, all the soldiers on the payroll of the Ottomans were now without a job. The French said, "Don't worry, we'll pay you and you'll fight for us now." And that's
Which, by the way, is something they still do today. They harass Africans who are trying to migrate to better worlds in North Africa, and they do Europe's bidding till this day. So that's nothing new. You're not telling us new information. All you're doing is explaining how evil, really, the European empires were.
how the French army incorporated multiple regiments of Spahi cavalrymen, as well as battalions of locally recruited light infantry, mainly from the Zouawa tribe, which would eventually become the famous Zouaves. Who do you think marched through Africa raising this blue-white-red banner? For the most part, regiments of West African infantrymen.
That's right. The people of Africa acted on their behalf. It's almost like they were colonized or something, and in order to avoid penalties that could also be as bad as death, poverty, exile, whatever, slavery, in order to do that, what they did was they just joined the winning force. It's almost like that happened.
Even more controversial, it has to stay between you and me. It happened countless times that local African chieftains called the French army for help against one of their rivals. That's literally History 101.
History 101 is people calling the French for help. Okay, so again, most people in the past, as you mentioned in this stupid thing, most people in the past, even if they had a worse rival, I mean, this happened in Europe. In Europe, these guys had Muslims as the enemy, but they were friends with other Islamic states. They were friendly with people in other areas. Like, are you not aware that some of the British kings literally were in direct contact with Muslims at a time when they couldn't even cross the borders to go to places like China and stuff? Like, are you not aware that the internals of different countries means that if there's another opportunity from another country, that you're going to try to take it in order to win, and if that leads to your demise, so be it. You are going to lose anyway.
For example, in the 1870s, a chieftain called Samori Touré was rapidly expanding his kingdom in West Africa. His army dominated the battlefield using modern weaponry bought from the British.
If African empires were poor, right, as you said earlier, how did they buy stuff from the British? Were they like getting it for like a discount?
This is when the people of Côte d'Ivoire refused to convert to Islam and did not want to send any more of their people as slaves to pay tribute. Without a proper army, they quickly asked the French army for help. And the conquest of West Africa was completed by General Alfred Dodds. Both of his parents were light-skins, mixed French and Senegalese. Alright, enough with the facts. Let's continue.
You will notice that I'm not correcting any of the stuff that he's saying, and the reason why is because he made a moral claim, not really a historical one, and yet he's still to prove that claim. All he's said so far is that the European powers colonized places and they did it for money, even though it contradicts what he said earlier, where he was like, we all know what he said earlier.
France's empire building led to huge financial gain. Its global settlements provided a network of trading posts and colonies that were hugely profitable for private investors. In West Africa alone, the gains from colonialism exceeded 3.2 billion francs in 1914.
Typical woke tactics by throwing random numbers that have absolutely no meaning. What does 3.2 billion francs from 1914 even mean?
Well, I'm guessing they've got a way how they calculated that. But what is most surprising to me is that instead of arguing that they got wealthy off of that, you're focusing on a specific number. And we've heard all kinds of numbers about ancient times, which we can all easily look at and like, oh, the Roman Empire would be about 3 trillion. In it's like, okay, whatever. But let's not focus on that number, and let's focus on a couple things. First of all, I mean, they made millions off of things in the past that were just there in West Africa, which, by the way, this guy again does not understand how rich West Africa was. Do you understand how much money they made from West Africa? Do you understand how much money West African kingdoms had before the Europeans came in? Do you understand if they had never colonized West Africa, that West Africa would probably be the craziest place today?
And just to portray how poorly researched this video really is, I found this 3.2 billion figure, and it actually comes from an opinion piece written by author Élise Huiry, where she writes, I quote, "Colonization of French West Africa was profitable for France, to the extent that the impact on cumulative domestic production exceeded 3.2 billion 1914 francs. But what this YouTube video did not understand.
In West Africa alone, the gains from colonialism exceeded 3.2 billion francs in 1914.
Is that Élise Huiry meant the cost of colonization of West Africa for French taxpayers amounted to 3.2 billion francs. It's clearly written in Table 1 and has nothing to do with the benefits extracted from colonization. This clearly shows how they're ready to manipulate numbers just to promote their political agenda.
Okay, if that was the cost of it, then what do you think the gains was from it? Or do you think that they, like other videos, you think that they were actually stupid and they basically bled themselves in order to just have slaves because they were like, let's just have like a sadistic place in West Africa, and it's gonna make us no money. It's just gonna bleed us dry. You must then understand that there's a profit behind that. They're probably making way more than that amount. In other words, is, to put it another way, that amount is probably like low. And you must remember as well, French citizenship. But we'll get back to that.
Where would France be without its colonies, its possession in the Caribbean? Where would France be without its huge possessions in sub-Saharan Africa? Where would France be without its possessions in Asia, without Algeria? And that's a question that is extremely important when we go back. And I'm just talking about the economy, right?
Probably wealthy.
Wait. Back up. So they owed Algeria money, right? They owed Algeria money. They needed to pay it back. The Ottomans took over, and then they were able to get rid of that by colonizing Africa. This is your story, by the way. I'm not going off of anything. Like I said, I'm not doing some deep research. I'm just going off of what you're saying, because you do. How would they have more money again? They couldn't even pay their debts, buddy. What are you talking about? And then later on, they've got 3 billion. Are you crazy? Like, what are you talking? This is your narrative. And also, are you saying they were stupid? Are you saying that they literally were so stupid that they were like, hey, if we just stay in our own little area and not colonize, then we will be rich as hell. But I know what we're going to do. Let's throw away money for no reason and just maintain this colony, and let's try to make money from it, but not be able to. I don't get the thinking of these people.
I mean, look at Japan, Brazil, China, India, the United States that had no African colonies.
Okay, he's got to be trolling. He has got to be trolling. Firstly, Brazil did have African colonies. If you consider the Portuguese who were running Brazil, they literally colonized Africa and Brazil. Are you high? America is even worse because America was ran by a bunch of people who had colonies in Africa. What are you talking about? They literally were shipping people from Africa, some of their little settlements in Africa, shipping them all the way to America. Like, do you not realize? I mean, you're doing the fact checking. Do you not realize that America was not a free country forever? And when they became free, they decided that they should colonize too. They decided to colonize the lands of the Native Americans and also one African country in specific, if you can say it now, Liberia, where they shipped back some of the slaves. Hello? Like, what? What are you talking about? They benefited from African colonization. The country of America benefited from African colonization. Now that I'm done with the one that did have African colonies, let's go mention the other ones that he mentions. So he says Japan. You do realize, even though Japan didn't colonize parts of Africa, they colonized a lot of people, which led to them exploiting those lands and people. And then, of course, the next two that he mentions, which are ridiculous, he says India and China. India never colonized anybody. China never colonized anybody. Do I have to remind you of Genghis Khan? Do I have to remind you? I mean, let's just say Genghis Khan alone. Do you not realize that these people were engaging in colonization forever? That's like your whole point of the video, wasn't it? That people have been colonizing all over the place. I know how he got there, by the way. He looked at these other countries, were like, oh, they're rich. These rich countries, they didn't engage in colonization. They did. And guess what they also engaged in? African slavery. The countries you just mentioned, not all of them, but Brazil, America.
And look at them now, they're the richest countries on earth.
Yeah, that's right. Let's pick the richest of the ones that he's just mentioned, China. Yeah, you do realize they're still colonizing to this day, right? They're still trying to expand and get a one China. And it's a very controversial thing to say that China has like stopped doing expansion and they don't want to let go of any of their territories at all. Even America has just like given up, like, okay, I guess one China it is.
Way, France forced Haiti, one of the world's poorest countries, to pay the equivalent of $21 billion in reparations for freeing itself from French colonialism and slavery.
Haiti, not to be confused with Tahiti. Yes, we're talking about islands in both cases, but completely different vibes. So remember, the French had built a lot of infrastructure in Saint-Domingue, and the independence of what is now Haiti meant that all the properties and investments of plantation owners were lost.
Aww. The plantation owners, the slave owners, they lost. Oh my God, that's a tragedy. They lost their property. That's so sad. That is very, very sad.
Now these people that invested in the colonies were so powerful that they pressured the new French king for a new expedition against Haiti in 1816 to suppress these Haitian rebels once and for all. At the same time, Haiti was broke. Nobody recognized independence, nobody wanted to trade with them, and the cherry on top, former slaves rejected any kind of authority and certainly did not want to go back to work in the plantations. In 1820,
Wait. So this video was about woke stuff and all of that. And he just said that slave owners got overthrown by slaves, and then other countries didn't want to trade, even though they had the same goods. They didn't want to trade with the people. For what reason? What's the reason that they didn't want to trade with them? Do you not see that you're building a stronger case for why those people were racist as hell?
25, Haiti accepted to pay an indemnity to former plantation owners in exchange for this recognition of independence. France asked for 150 million francs, which was equal to only 1 full year of revenue generated by Saint-Domingue.
Let's all shed a tear their little slave profit thing just fell apart. They only got 1% of what they would have got, or whatever the hell he said. How sad. How sad for them.
At its peak, of course. However, negotiations were dragging on for so long that Charles X got fed up. Yes, the same as for Algeria. And we know what he did next. He sent an armada of 14 warships to blockade all ports and bully Haiti into signing the agreement. Charles X was the ultimate mafia boss. If you owe him money, you're in trouble. But if he owes you money, you're in deep.
I don't know if he doesn't realize that saying someone is a mafia boss is not a good thing. Like, does he realize that he's making like this guy's image? Dude, the people you just talked about, you've literally just said that they're basically out here extorting poor people for money, attacking people they owe, taking their lands, dominating them, being pure. What's woke about telling people this? Like, where's the woke part? Like, the guys were evil. Where's the woke part in this? I don't get it. And you're making the case stronger. I would argue that that video did a pretty poor job. You did a great job in analyzing and showing how evil France was, and really why they should pay.
Revolution proclaimed universalist principles, freedom and rights for all men. That was meant to lead to suffrage for adult males and the abolition of slavery in mainland France. Slavery was actually reinstated before it was banned again.
Okay. This one is tricky. In 1789, French revolutionaries declared all men are born and remain free and equal in rights. So then all the slaves were happy. They came up to plantation owners and were like, "What's up, homie? We're finally free. Those are my rates." But then the French revolutionaries were like,
No.
Slavery was only abolished 5 years later in 1794. However, business is business. By doing so, French plantation owners preferred to continue the slave trade, but
So what he's saying is not tricky. It's only tricky if you want to be dishonest. If you want to be real, you have to say that these guys who, like the Americans, were obsessed with the idea of liberty, had a giant contradiction on their hand, which is we want liberty for all men, but we still want to hold slaves.
under British rule. So to seduce them again, Napoleon reinstated slavery in 1802, but the damage had already been done. In the end, France would re-abolish slavery in 1848, just to milk this thing a little bit more.
Oh, by the way, if the slaves weren't producing that much money, why did they have a problem abolishing it? You would think they'd be like, God damn, finally, this thing was just like they were taking away our money, and we know that these slaves don't produce that much money, so finally we can let them free. Like, why do you think they wanted slavery to return?
Jules Ferry was a French statesman and leading promoter of colonial expansion. In 1884, he said, "The higher races have a right over the lower races. They have a duty to civilize the inferior races."
I mean, I know it's picky, but I have to add minutes to the video. He actually said this in 1885 and not in 1884. And as a
Okay, did everybody get that fact check? He was not racist in 1884. He was openly racist in 1885. I hope everybody understands that. Very important point. In 1885, that's when he really got racist and came out there and said it about these people. By the way, he's not the only one who was saying it. Keep that in mind.
matter of fact, this was the mainstream ideology of the universalist French left at the time. But in
Wait. Let's start again. So this was the ideology of the French left at the time, right? This was the ideology. Wasn't the name of the video that you're trying to debunk, wasn't it where the French get their racist ideas? Let's play that again.
today we'll be reacting to this video called How France's Colonial Past Explains Its Racism Today.
Listen, maybe I'm the stupid one, but isn't that just what he said? Like, is this not like a very accurate video in at least saying that, yes, the colonial past explains the racism?
In response to this quote, conservatives like French politician Georges Clemenceau said, "I heard that some German scientists proved scientifically that French people were an inferior race to Germans because France lost to Germany in 1870. Since then, I watch with a careful eye anyone talking about inferior races." So essentially, French colonization was thought by the left and achieved by the conservatives.
Colonial
I actually have no idea. I'm gonna say this again. Is this guy joking? Is this like supposed to be a video where he's like pointing out why they were racist, but he's like doing it in like a weird way? Because like I said, he's doing a better job than they were, or they did.
Colonialism was spun as Mission Civilisatrice, the civilizing mission.
One of the corners of French imperialism was the idea that France was the country of the Enlightenment. So it was really a huge part of the French brand of colonialism, colonizing to, almost this divine mission to take people out of the darkness and bring them into civilization. But the civilizing mission was just the self-aggrandizing and the prestige that France got from having the second biggest empire in the world.
That's the entire problem of doing historical shortcuts. Truth is, by the 1870s, Africa was for grabs. Europe had both a massive technological and numerical advantage.
So before he carries on, let me just state the facts here. So yes, the civilizing mission of France is the thing that led to what I was talking about, where African citizens were used in war, and basically they were ready to disappear type people in war. Some of them not even given guns. They were experimented on by doctors. Then, there was a whole bunch of stuff that was happening under the French civilizing missions that was not good, which the French government admits to today, not because they're woke, but because they've got the documents on it.
There were more people in France than all of its future West African colonies. And it's possible that the French government believed that if they didn't colonize Africa, their longtime nemesis, the British, or even worse, the Germans, would take over these lands anyway.
But even at the time,
the I might as well be evil because there's other evil people argument. First of all, the French didn't colonize because they thought that other people were going to colonize it anyway. They colonized because they wanted to colonize. And he's proven that over and over again. And they wanted to colonize for very typical colonization reasons.
the propaganda of the civilizing mission was challenged. We see this from the Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804.
I don't understand. How could the civilizing mission ideology from the 1880s have been challenged by the Haitian Revolution that happened 80 years before?
You don't know how a past event can eventually affect a future event?
It was a successful insurrection by self-liberated enslaved people against French colonial rule in Saint-Domingue. Its leaders demanded France apply the principles of its revolution to its colonized subjects.
No, not really.
It all started when mulattoes wanted to be granted the same rights as whites, especially inheritance rights. But that didn't work. Their white half-siblings were like, move along.
So again, this is going by his story of this. What do we call it when your white siblings reject your freedoms because you're not white?
So the mulattoes went to the plantations and they said, what up homie, we're black too. Let's take down these evil white mofos. The white plantation owners were now shaking. They were literally in the middle of a furnace. So in 1793 they called for help. British troops disembarked and with the help of the Spanish army took over Saint-Domingue. And this is when the French Republic quickly abolished slavery because they needed an army. So now all slaves were free to fight for the Republic. And then this guy called Sonthonax did an Uber delivery of 20,000 rifles to the former slaves. In the end, by 1797, this allowed General Toussaint Louverture and his troops to kick out the British and Spanish forces from Saint-Domingue. Now the mulattoes were like, we're the bosses now, you Namibians go back to work. Only problem, these former slaves were heavily armed and had military experience. Boom! Civil War. And then Napoleon's army came right into this bee's nest. They actually managed to win battles and take over the colony, but tropical disease decimated their army and Haiti became independent. My god, I almost forgot! Haiti literally had this racist imperialist past. In 1805, they literally declared themselves an empire, where whites were not allowed to own any land, nothing. And
You know, if he didn't do that weird racist stuff, this video would be so interesting. Now, all of a sudden, it's racism that whites aren't allowed to own land. But before, when the other guys were doing it, it was like just a jokey joke thing.
then they went on to conquer the Spanish part of the island, committing massacre after massacre. 10% of the Dominican population was gone. This is literally what we call colonial crimes. Then they
Right. So the massacres they did, the massacres that the free people did who freed themselves, that's colonial crimes. But the stuff that the colonial masters did, that's not a crime. They were just chilling. They were just doing their thing.
left and they came back and then reoccupied the Spanish part from 1822 to 1844, trying to suppress the local Spanish culture, replacing it with French, and forcing thousands to flee to other Spanish colonies. And it's not as if they reinstated slavery, but unpaid forced labor at gunpoint.
Which, of course, you and I are against, right? Right? That's why we consider it a crime. Those people were committing a crime, like the French did, like the Spanish did, the English did, so many Ottomans, so many of these Europeans did. You agree that it's a crime now?
Colonizing mission continued into the 20th century. France occupied Syria and Lebanon.
I find it extremely unsettling that they have the nerves to talk about the occupation of Lebanon and Syria, as if these were independent nations, while completely ignoring the fact that these regions had been colonized by the Ottoman Empire for nearly 400 years.
So what's your point? That the European powers that colonize continue to colonize? It's a literal fact. Like, what do you want them to do? Say, oh, it never happened? Because I don't even understand the point of this. They're literally saying it because it's what happened. Also, America basically colonized the America basically. So would it be perfectly okay if somebody came and colonized them now? Like if China came and colonized them, you'd be like, firstly, don't just say that America got colonized today. Also mention that they themselves had colonized other places and basically destroyed the main population.
The reason why the French were also interested in Lebanon particularly dates back 1860. France had sent 6,000 soldiers to the Levant in order to protect Christian communities in the Middle East. In this case, Lebanese and Syrian Christians.
Right. And the reason why the Andalusians had taken over that land was to protect the Moors, the Muslim Moors that existed in that area. They had no civilization or colonization missions. They just went there because their brothers, the Moors, who were Muslim, had taken part of it, and they just came in to help out their brothers.
Some call it the world's first humanitarian mission. In the end, they negotiated with the Ottomans for the creation.
Whoever calls it the world's first humanitarian mission is a stupid person, because there's tons of humanitarian stuff that happened even before we get to AD. Just starting from ancient Egypt, Sumeria, all these other places, there's tons of what we would consider humanitarian things that had happened. So to say that that was the first is ridiculous.
Of an autonomous Mount Lebanon district with a Christian majority and a Christian governor. The borders of this district is essentially at the root of the modern day Lebanon.
There's also the trauma of war. The Algerian War for Independence, 1954 to 1962. It's hugely significant in understanding contemporary French society. The war began when the newly formed FLN movement declared its aim was to restore a sovereign Algerian state. They used guerrilla warfare at home and also diplomacy abroad, particularly at the UN. France dropped.
So there's only 3 minutes of this video left. I hope they get to the point, because I want to see his conclusion. I think I'm going to have to skip some of these because a lot of them look very copyrightable.
Drafted some 2 million conscripts over the course of the war.
What they're not telling you is that Algeria was not any other French colony. It was legally part of France.
Ah, so in the Ottoman Empire, that place wasn't legally part of the Ottoman Empire, but now this place is legally part of France. I'm so confused about how he's deciding these things. It seems like he's not going by modern standards, he's not going by any of that. He's just going by, if it's Western, it's good, if it's anything else, it's bad. Also, by the way, that thing of civil helping people out, if you're just going to help people out just because they're Christian and you're not going to help them anybody else out, that's not necessarily humanitarian in the way that you think it is. Helping people out who belong to your group is something people did forever.
Population of Algeria at the time was 9 million, of which 8 million were native Algerians and 1 million European settlers which had French citizenship. After World War II, Algerian nationalists were clear: either French citizenship and equal rights, or independence. Since they were told no, of course the war started in 1954 and then intensified when France granted independence to Morocco and Tunisia, but not to Algeria.
The human cost of the war remains unknown, particularly on the Algerian side. The Algerian government claims as many as 1.5 million died. The war ended 130 years of colonial French rule in Algeria, yet for the longest time, it was called a war without a name.
Now talking about this is like walking straight into quicksands. But independent estimates of the Algerian death during the war range from 140,000 to 350,000. And let's just say that not all were caused by the French military. To further complicate the situation, as many Algerians fought in the ranks of the French.
Yeah, so I'm not even going to contribute to the numbers there, but clearly there's one that's in the wrong, and we need to talk about that. We're going to look deeper into it. Modern African history is obviously a part where we haven't even touched yet, but there's a reason for that. There's a lot of stuff in the ancient world that we haven't touched yet either, and some of them have come up in this video.
Army, as in the rebel forces opposing it.
In my case, Algerian history was actually covered over a day, more or less.
Of course! You live in France! What did you expect?
Walking around the street and seeing people that you learned about much later were actually slave traders or, colonialists or war crimes heroes is extremely distressing.
I feel offended by all these statues of white men. But when you
Buddy, the Algerians are white. What are you talking about? They're not offended that they're white. They're offended that they're slave traders. Does that not register in your brain? Now, obviously, Algeria was a slave trading place itself in a very devastating way. I mean, if you want to do the tit for tat, hey, these guys were enslaving Europeans, Algeria is your spot. That's where you want to go. If you want to go tit for tat, there's the spot that you want to get. But leaving that, do you not see why people would not necessarily want to be represented by a slave trading people, especially since slave trading in North Africa is still a thing, especially in Libya?
Have statues of slave traders in Algiers, that's part of a cultural heritage.
What cultural heritage? You talk about the guys who were there in the 1800s and then got chased out in the mid 1900s. That heritage?
Never been a French apology for colonial crimes in Algeria.
What would an apology actually mean?
I can tell you right away. Reparations. Cash. Flus. Do you see Vietnam?
Well, according to your video, France doesn't really have a great reputation for paying its debts, does it? Seems like they're just going to do the same exact thing. So I would say, firstly, start with a verbal one. Let's start there.
Do you see Vietnam demand reparations from France? No! Because their economy is booming. They don't need no cash.
So, as of recently, Vietnam is doing pretty good for itself. But these numbers are equivalent to a lot of third world countries, if you want to call them that. The way that Vietnam is managing its finances is actually helping the population, and it's actually working. But what he's talking about of booming, Like these numbers are nowhere near like proper like booming countries. Not to mention that Vietnam did get paid reparations. They demanded and they got reparations. Let's read this. War reparations made pursuant to the San Francisco Peace Treaty with Japan include reparations amounting to 550 million or 198 billion yen in 1956 were made to the Philippines, and US $39 million that in the end to South Vietnam, payment to the International Committee of the Red Cross to compensate prisoners of war of 4.5 million pounds sterling was made, and Japan relinquished all overseas assets, approximately US 23.6 billion. Not to mention that if you look at the history of Vietnam, you will see a lot of them basically demanding the West to help with other things. This is before this very, very date.
As a matter of fact, the Vietnamese are actually quite proud of this French heritage that they have.
To me, the first apology will have to be to recognize. And it will be very easy because we have archives. We're not talking about building a whole entire history. Unveiled the hidden past. Highlight the hidden past. Highlight the dead angle. And then at some point, I'm not an economist, but some type of economic reparation will have to be weighed.
Alright, what did I tell you? Of course.
Buddy, you're not a genius for guessing that people who talk about these issues are going to demand reparations. That's kind of what they demand after you decimate their countries. But I will say that since he has completely misunderstood half the stuff that he's talking about, and the fact that he's like very good at like very small things, but then very confused about the larger issues, tells me that he was doing quick research rather than having an overall understanding of the topic. So yeah.
And the biggest irony of it all is that they live in France. If France has to pay reparations to African countries, France will have to raise taxes, which will be taken from their salaries.
So what's the point? Well, if they're for reparations, I'm sure they'll be okay with that. In fact, if the cash reparations is paid off, that might actually drive them to return to their homelands.
Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Let me know if you enjoyed this special video. If you're new,
so there's a lot of parts that I let slide. The reason is because I don't really focus that much on the colonizers. I try to focus on the Africans themselves, because if I focus too much on the colonizers, then I'm going to end up being like this guy telling you the story of colonization, slavery, and all that stuff, instead of telling you the history of Africa, which he has no idea about at all.